So hi again, welcome. My name is Victoria Herman. I am the Managing Director of the Arctic Institute, and I am so excited to welcome you to today's webinar, the first in our Breaking the Ice Ceiling series. We will be showcasing over 20 women traditional and Indigenous knowledge holders, experts, scientists, researchers, artists, practitioners, and local leaders over the next few months. And we hope that this is just the first that you will join us for. Today, we have three amazing speakers that I will present in just a minute and hand over my virtual mic to. But before we do, a bit of housekeeping. If you have not already done so, please mute yourself for your presentations. That way we can all focus on our three speakers. I will be monitoring the chat throughout. I will be monitoring the chat throughout this presentation. If you have questions for any of our speakers, please put those questions in the chat. I will be monitoring that, and I'll ask you if you would like to come on and ask yourself, or if you're having some difficulty with your internet, if I can read it for you once we move into the question and answer session. For those of you who might need to leave early, no worries. We will be recording this webinar so you can catch anything that you may miss in the follow-up email I will be sending out later today. I think that is all from me, and I'm sure you are all excited to hear from our experts today. So I am going to give a brief introduction to our three speakers. You will first be hearing from Dr. Jessica Graybill, who is an associate professor of geography and the director of the Russian and Eurasia Studies Program at Colgate University. Dr. Graybill and I first met a few years ago now at the first National Science Foundation Research Coordination Network that I was a part of, and one of their meetings in St. Petersburg. And I am so excited to hear her presentation today. We will then be moving on to Dr. Julie Decker, who is the director and CEO of the Anchorage Museum in Alaska and a longtime collaborator with a few pretty cool projects that we have up our sleeves for 2021. And she will then be followed by Bodil Kelstrup, who is a curator at the Anchorage Museum and hosted me actually a few months ago for a really meaningful webinar on climate justice. So I'm so excited to hear from Bodil again and continue that conversation. So again, please mute yourself if you are just joining us. Please put your questions in the chat, and I am handing over now my virtual mic to Dr. Jessica Graybill, who will take the virtual stage.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Dr. Herman, it's a pleasure to say thank you to Dr. Herman now. That was indeed several years ago that we met in St. Petersburg, and what a pleasure it is to be here today. I would like to talk a bit about stories rather than about my research, because those stories are what backs up the research. And I'd like to have this thought generally of ice as freedom. And so let me explain that as I move through these different thoughts today. I don't have any slides. I'm just going to be talking. So if you want to keep your screens tuned out and you don't want to look at me, that's absolutely fine. My voice will still be here. As I began to prepare for this today, I was waylaid a bit by, well, the political events of last week in the US and consideration of what this means for our collective future. Additionally, increasing COVID cases at my son's school means he's now learning from home this week. While these things aren't going to stop me from being here today, it did change my plans a bit for exactly what I had hoped I would share with you today. Rather than dwell on what could have been in terms of thinking about data of women in science and women in Arctic studies and research trajectories, I'm going to use some vignettes to reflect on some milestones of my so far 20-year career in academia, starting as a graduate student, then as an early career faculty member, and now as a tenured faculty member with some publications and grants to my name. I'd like to share a few vignettes to highlight certain aspects of breaking ice ceilings and melting ice walls, to image what may come next for us individually or collectively. Some of these vignettes are drawn from personal experience and some from other women I've known along my career path. They're meant to be reflexive, perhaps to provide advice, but more importantly, to just share experiences in the hopes that they might be meaningful to other women or minority peoples traveling their own path through Arctic studies and simply knowledge holding. I'd like you to keep the image of a glacier or an ice sheet in your mind's eye throughout this talk, because I've imagined that I'm part of this ice, excuse me, both as a piece of it and figuring out how to navigate it. So to do so, I need to maintain three things: momentum, an internal fire, and sharp edges. And I'll discuss what I mean by these three things as I continue. So vignette 1, part 1, exhilaration. Early on in my graduate studies, in my late 20s, I was a geologist. Attending American Geophysical Union meeting for the first time was absolutely exhilarating. I nailed my presentation, which always feels good. But now, 20 years later, I barely remember the content of that first conference presentation. What I do remember is meeting a female geologist, a woman, who looked nothing like most geologists I'd ever met. What I mean by this is she was dressed in an all-black power suit, high heels, with perfectly coiffed hair, manicured nails, the whole 9 yards. She sought me and another female graduate student out to chat. We talked about what we were working on, but quickly she turned to advice that she thought was necessary for us as young women in this field. It was the following, and I'm sure many of you have heard something like this before. You've got to show no chinks in the armor. You've got to be better intellectually all the time. You've got to look better and more professional, or you won't be taken seriously. And you can't smile or chat too much, or you won't be taken seriously at all. It's got to be business all the time. We were a bit incredulous and thought, well, she's just bitter, and surely this doesn't apply to our generation. Well, yes and no. Her perfect visual armor may not be mine, but I have developed some of my own through the experiences I'll share next. So vignette 1, part 2, deflation. In early physics, graduate student in my cohort was torn apart by her desire to pursue graduate studies, but also have a fulfilling religious life as a devout Catholic. It seems there wasn't room for both, according to her grad advisor, and so she left the field with a master's. She has continued on to become an invaluable geophysicist in multiple government labs, even traveling to Antarctica to lead tech and computer-oriented work there. And as a graduate student in geology, my experiences were that certain parts of my anatomy were stared at in certain ways by men in positions of authority over my future. I was called a damn woman for getting grants aimed at graduate student participation in international meetings and fieldwork. My advisor threatened to publish my work without me if I didn't move along quickly enough. This meant that I took my data and ideas home with me every single night on a zip drive. I left this field, but not before getting my master's, and after it became clear that male students were receiving better TA and RA-ship benefits than I was, and were clearly being favored in letters of recommendation for awards, and I could see down the line for jobs. Intermission, regrouping. I was really angry for a while, but I learned to move on. The words of wisdom about this came to me from my godmother, who said to me, you know, if you stay angry, you're letting them win because they have power over your emotions and actions. Letting go to move on stoked my internal fire and gave me new momentum. And yes, I developed a few sharp edges because of it. What did I do? I took a year off from academic studies, worked a different job using my Russian language and editing skills. I regrouped, rebuilding my momentum by exploring what other fields and options I might like to pursue. I came back to academia in a new field with new determination, watching out for sticky people and situations, and with even more internal fire that was going to get me through this experience. Looking back now 20 years later, I'm not sorry or regretful for this early experience. Rather, I think of it as a weight in the chosen career path that I have. Okay, vignette 3, determination. So I returned to academia to get a doctorate in geography and urban ecology at the University of Washington, where I experienced nothing but collegiality and goodwill for most of my peers and faculty mentors. I developed a project that led me to fieldwork in subarctic Russia, which has continued to move me further north into Arctic studies over time. This experience, along with good funding and good mentoring, provided me the momentum to succeed in my PhD and get a tenure-track job. Settling into a tenure-track job is no easy feat, as I'm sure many of us on this call may know. The joys and burdens of the tripartite commitment and US academia makes this a demanding career. Producing quality research, teaching well, and contributing to university service takes tenacity, a lot of your time, and the bulk of anyone's energy. Well, I was bound and determined to make it. Possibly because this can be attributed to my internal fire, burning really hot and strong due to being told that I was a damn woman, watching other women be told that they might actually not be good enough to be scientists, or needing to focus only on one thing, and seeing some, perhaps even many women quit a PhD or leave academia because they foresaw insurmountable hurdles in their paths. So determination continued. This meant, for me, making it meant seeking leadership outside my university and seeking grants with teams of other scholars. I have pursued this relentlessly. And here are 3 examples. My internal momentum propelled me to chair subunits in my discipline's professional association, which has allowed my name to be known farther than it otherwise would have been. In other words, service just on my university campus wasn't going to do it, unfortunately. Internal fire then provided that energy for me to seek out colleagues with whom to write and thankfully get grants that continue to widen my network. And that widened name, alongside my willingness to work really hard and put in time and energy where many men perhaps wouldn't have, brought editorship of a journal to me. I work hard using my sharp edges when needed to make sure publications are of high quality. I think that has paid off over time, both for me and for polar studies. And I'm always looking for good new manuscripts for polar geography, so email me if you're interested. Okay, I've done my plug. I'll keep going here. So determination, sharpening that determination. That's paid off in my career, but I've developed more sharp edges along the way. And those do make their way into personal relationships sometimes, if I'm brutally honest with myself. And I have to work at softening that. Why, you ask, has there been the need for more sharp edges? I mean, I've been able to lead in my discipline, my region of study, as a journal editor, and in grants personship. Haven't I made it? Well, here's why. Some sort of quotes and sort of things to think about here. Sharp edges come from this, being asked incredulously, oh, wait, you mean you're not just an editor, but the editor of the journal? By men. Not a single woman has asked me that. Picking up the slack when male colleagues don't, often in order to meet grant or publication deadlines, or to ensure that a conference or workshop is well organized and inclusive for all participants. This will sharpen anyone's soft edges, especially when this work often comes in the home stretch. Some men have told me that I've been included on team grants or received my own fellowships simply because I am a woman. And that's necessary these days for funding agencies. In other words, it's not because of my talent as a researcher, it's because I'm part of a quota. One needs a sharp edge to cut that one out of one's own thoughts, certainly about their abilities. And these are the reasons, and others, that I no longer apologize for who I am or for the decisions I make, or if I might be a week late on a review for a paper. And I say that as a journal editor, right? And finally, beyond my own experiences, edges are sharpened yet again upon reading the reports about the numbers of women who don't make it into the highest echelons of academia or other career paths. Some of those reasons have been highlighted here, and others that I might include are those of women just being tired of the fight or finding greater reward in other careers or daily life paths. In reasons for leaving, many women cite the overburden of being determined, going the extra mile all the time, and staying sharp-edged while also being primary caregivers for children or elders, let alone being a partner, if that's in someone's life. So what does this all have to do with the Arctic or with ice ceilings or walls? These vignettes, some personal and some shared, emphasize the conditions and challenges for many women in academia writ large. Some of them relate to conducting research in the Arctic when that occurs within academia. Regarding the Arctic as its own entity, however, I have found that conducting research in this region with and for Arctic communities provides amazing outlets for creativity and exploration of the Arctic's places and communities, alongside partners, as well as for the researcher's own self. And I attribute this to the willingness of many Arctic communities to be open to me and to multiple ways of being and knowing, to knowledge co-production and seeing cooperation and reciprocity as a way to thrive. And this is what keeps me coming back to this kind of ice. So let's return to this glacier image, or the ice sheet glacier ice image, for just a minute. I hope I have in my own mind, the Greenland ice sheet in my mind's eye. Rather than focusing on the obstacles and possibly impenetrable ice ceilings, because of my own experiences and by listening to and watching others, I've learned to use my own momentum, my own internal fire and sharp edges to keep carving a path through it. As a chunk in the glacier, I've moved quickly and slowly, as well as up and down and laterally with the ice around me. I've learned better how to gauge my momentum individually and with the movement of the whole glacier to know how best to move. I've become better at using my internal fire and sharp edges to melt and carve lateral and upward paths. By keeping an eye on the long distance goal, breaking through the ice ceiling wherever possible to be on top of the glacier, I use my momentum, internal fire, and sharp edges to move along and up whenever possible, right? So it's just seeking opportunity whenever and wherever. The path hasn't been linear or steady. I'm okay with that, right? Choosing a career sometimes isn't always about sequential leaps on a time scale, but knowing when and how to choose them. So my larger hope for sort of ice freedom. So I've come to consider that lateral movement can also lead to upward movement for others as well as for myself. And this is where I want to broaden our metaphor from breaking through the ice ceiling to melting ice walls, using internal fire and sharp edges to widen the path means that more can follow, and in broader paths to more parts of the ice ceiling together. So visualize this fiery, sharp-edged little chunk gliding, weaving, and carving the glacier, right? Seeking possible, good, and better paths through it. Now visualize all of us doing that together. That's empowering. And I welcome your thoughts and questions.
Thank you so much. If everyone could please join me in giving a virtual round of applause to Jessica for what I think was an incredibly inspiring start, not just to today, but to our whole series, thinking about her personal journey and experience, how it relates to all of us, particularly the woman on this call. I know that I certainly had many moments that resonated with me. And importantly, what we can do together, what we can imagine together, and how do we move forward to ensure that the future is far more inclusive than the past. And with that, I am going to invite Dr. Julie Decker to now take the virtual stage, because that's exactly what she is doing at the Anchorage Museum and the Seed Lab, imagining those futures and helping us think about how we can create them together. So hold your questions for Jessica. I am monitoring that chat. So for those of you who have joined us since starting, if you have questions throughout the presentations, please put them in the chat, and we will be moving to a question and answer session after the presentations are finished. So with that, I'm going to hand over my virtual mic to you, Julie, and you can take the stage.
Thanks so much, Victoria, and hello, everybody. It's about 8:27 in Anchorage, Alaska, so it's pitch dark and hopefully about to snow. I'm going to try sharing my screen, and we'll share some slides. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And I'll do a slideshow. Sorry, hold on one sec. Okay. And I will say Budil was my colleague, is working to join us. She was having some tech issues, so hopefully she'll be here in a second if she's not already. This is the Anchorage Museum. We're in the largest city of Alaska, but by no means claiming the center of Alaska. There are so many women throughout the state who are making change. For me, this image represents an important moment. It was when the Arctic Council was hosting its meetings in Anchorage, Alaska. It was the first time a sitting president had come to visit the Arctic. On our facade, we put Chinanguninyu, which is the indigenous language of Anchorage, the Dena'ina language, and it said, "Welcome, you came here." I'm going to talk a little bit about what we as women are doing in Anchorage, and how we talk about place and climate, that science is embedded in all we do, but really what we're interested in talking about is thinking about human lifeways, and how that helps to define place and how human lifeways are affected by our changing climate. As a museum, we put decolonization conversations at the center. Museums have a flawed history in terms of their efforts and their failed efforts to represent the stories of people of place. So we work to redefine what a museum is and should mean to its community. We talk a lot about climate justice. We work with women as scholars, as artists, as researchers, as activists, as curators. We put creativity at the center. We focus on the future. We think one of our important roles is not to so much to reflect on the past, together towards a more positive future that includes solutions and action. We like to rethink traditional definitions of knowledge, that academic definitions of knowledge are not inclusive enough. We co-create with community. We create everything from books to albums, music, education curriculum, work with teens, art installations, work with writers, performers, and we go outdoors into the landscape. We don't believe that a museum is about the building itself, but about the ideas it represents. And we work in the landscape on large scale projects. We talk about architecture, design. We host conferences and convenings, and yes, exhibitions. But we don't think that's at the center of what museums do necessarily anymore. We talk a lot about place, and we think that traditional map view of the Mediterranean at the center is not always accurate. That these polar regions are really at the center if you just spin the globe a bit. We think Alaska has a lot in common and many important connections between other northern places. So this becomes our neighborhood if you spin the globe a bit. And we think less maybe about our connections to the rest of the continental United States, and a lot about our our neighbors around the polar regions. We think that when we talk about climate change, it's about climate justice and who it's affecting. In Alaska, that means Indigenous communities who are deeply affected by climate change, who are the first to adapt. These are children on the western coast of Alaska, which has experienced dramatic coastal erosion. This is a photograph by Brian Adams, a photographer we work with quite a bit, who documents people and change in northern Alaska. We are cognizant of the North as the new tourist center. There's eco-tourists, artists, scientists, filmmakers flocking to the North and exporting the story of Northerners. We think Northerners have their own story to tell and should be the storytellers. So we work to empower and highlight those voices. When we talk about architecture, we mean things like this: the Unangan raincoats made out of animal gut, that this is the most sustainable architecture. And this is where we need to learn and to understand what it does mean to live with an understanding of land and landscape. We don't think that these are people in peril or that that's the primary narrative to be presented. This has not been effective messaging about climate change. Instead, we need to understand how climate change affects our lifeways, our foodways, the way we think about transportation and energy, both in urban and rural communities. I wanted to highlight some of our projects with artists. People think about the polar bear as an icon of climate change. We work with artists to tell much more complex stories about climate. This is a project with the artist Bryndis Snaebornsdottir, who's from Iceland, and Mark Wilson. They work to document every taxidermied polar bear in the United Kingdom. And found them in the strangest of places, from homes to pubs. But their current project is to study what happens in communities when polar bears stay inland much longer or come to land in places where they haven't been before. So they're working with scientists and community members in Iceland and Alaska and Norway to think about the future of the polar bear, but also the future of humans with polar bears. We work with the artist Nicholas Galanen, who has made the cover of every art magazine in 2020 for his work to talk about decolonization, climate, people, indigeneity. Has a powerful voice that helps tell the story of Northern places. And his partner, Merritt Johnson, who works with sound and video to talk about how important the voices of Indigenous people are in thinking about our future. Right now, we have a major exhibition and a project called Extra Tough. It's all about women of the North. We use contemporary art to examine the roles of women, the wages of women, women in the past and women in the future. And really, we're struck by how many untold stories there are in Northern archives and museum archives. Obviously, women are at the center of human lifeways in Northern places, but their stories simply have not been documented, have not been told. And this is an important project for us as we began to realize that we have an important imperative now to help document these stories, highlight the role of women in Northern places. So far, our story has been about the settler or the Arctic explorer. It's a very male-dominant, stereotypical narrative, and it's time to change that. We work with women like Allison Warden, who raps about her family in Kaktovik and about the polar bear. We work with tattoo artists who are skin tattooing and bringing back the Indigenous traditions of tattoos. We worked with Brian Adams on the I Am Inuit project, where he told the stories or worked with communities to tell their own stories through photography and quotes. And I love this picture of Marie Rexford on the book cover. This is one of those badass women of the North. We start in talking about climate change with land acknowledgement. The museum sits on Dena'ina land. We work, we live on Dena'ina land. And Alaska, it's really important to start with that acknowledgement. And I think it's important to start with that acknowledgement everywhere. So we have a project with the city to put land acknowledgement in public places. We work with designers to create large-scale installations that begin with that simple acknowledgement before the conversation begins. We've started putting these phone booths around our community where you can call this number and you can hear the stories of the places where you're standing, from Dena'ina Elder oral histories, and from our Dena'ina curator, Erin Leggett. We've been working a lot with sound ecology. So we work with science quite a bit, but we try to do so in unexpected ways. One of the artists we work with, Stuart Hyatt, discovered that there were this many sound recordings by the USGS in Alaska. So these were basically sound recorders about the size of a refrigerator that were located at all of these points in Alaska. And the USGS was starting to go back and remove them. But before they did so, Stuart started working to capture the sounds and create an album and a major installation recording the sounds of Alaska. And we're very interested in ideas of sound ecology. We're working with teens and students in schools throughout Alaska to continue this sound ecology and these recordings. And we work with musicians to create albums inspired by these sounds. We do a lot of outdoor installations, getting outside of the museum and working with artists who are documenting climate change and introducing those to public space in different ways. These are a series of shelters we constructed throughout Anchorage that featured images by more than 12 photographers and videographers documenting the landscape and its adaptations. We work with the photographer Acacia Johnson, who right now is working on a project to document women in Antarctica. There's this stereotype of the scientist working in the other polar region, and she wants us all to know that they are primarily women who are undertaking this research and are in these extreme landscapes, helping all of us to better understand them. This is a woman artist we work with, Christina Seeley, who has been working with sound again. This is an image she captured while she was tracking sound from airplanes that fly over Anchorage and across the inlet to places all around the globe. There's a place you can stand at the edge of Anchorage where these planes, it feels like they're going just a few feet over your head. So working to help us understand our place in a different way and to think about logistics and technology. This is Seed Lab, which Victoria mentioned. This is the space across from the museum. We renovated this building with a major grant, turned it over to artists and to scientists and to researchers, worked with a lot of creatives and with a lot of communities to create new projects that address climate change and climate justice. We started to transform the building with artists inside and out. These are just two of the murals by Indigenous artists that were painted just a few months ago on the side of the building. I mentioned we focus on the future quite a bit. I think we all have a major conversation to have about our future and how we share it. We think that we've lost largely our language for being able to talk about the future, that our moment is so conflicted that we can't really imagine how to get beyond it. So we work with researchers and artists and designers and creatives to think about what do we need to be future ready and how do we survive now, but also in the next era that we enter. So we've done open calls, seeking ideas and proposals, and it's a continuing focus for us. we're working with the artist John Grady, who's known for these trees made up of tiny pieces of wood that have been reconstructed. He documents trees in many different landscapes, but our project with him currently is to think about forest fires and how fires are affecting not just our forests, but our urban places in Alaska and California and Australia and across the globe. We worked on this project with the artist Jonathan Keats to develop a new time standard. It's called River Time. So in Alaska, we worked with 5 different rivers and the USGS data on the flow of those rivers, and took the mean flow rate for those rivers to create a new river time. So what would happen if we didn't run on atomic clocks, but our meetings were scheduled by river time? Because of climate change, the clock runs faster. So we greeted the new year on river time about a week earlier than everybody else celebrated atomic river time. We like to work with community members, artists, to raise voices, to think about the messages they want to create. This is a project where we worked with youth to create signs, almost like political signs that you'd see in neighborhoods, and we put them all over the museum lawn to feature the messages of youth and thinking about the future. Budil, hopefully she's here, we'll talk a little bit about our work, thinking about how do we talk about sustainability in ways that really relate to each person and their everyday. So Budil would host repair workshops, and the woman pictured here is an artist, Amy Meisner, who would do these repair workshops and teach people how to make their clothing last longer and really change maybe the stereotype around mending, and talk about how important it is in our time of consumerism to rethink what we have and how it's made and how we just extend the life of our objects. We talk about a lot about food security in Alaska. COVID has made that very real for us, and thinking about food supply. Thinking about fresh food in all of our places from the Arctic to the subarctic in Alaska is a very important issue. So we work with artists, immigrant communities, indigenous communities to talk a lot about food and food sustainability. We work with teen girls. This is an incredibly important demographic. We think teen girls, young women, are really the future. And I think the more we work with young women, the more impressed we are with what our future might hold. These are active, engaged, educated young women who care a lot and are invested in the future of our places. I should mention that we're partnering with the Arctic Institute on a magazine about middle school girls in polar regions. We use our work to talk about landscape, to connect people to the natural environment and our urban environment. We worked with a photographer named Carrie Tasker, who was documenting glacier forms and project that onto our facade. We take climate data and present it in new ways. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the warming stripe projects. We calculated the warming trends for Anchorage over the last 100 years and created this large scale mural installation representing that data and placed it in the middle of downtown in a retail business that had closed. We worked with 2 female artists and an Indigenous female curator from Canada to do these large scale installations throughout the city. This was one called Tidelands, which created a new structure out of shipping containers that encouraged people to walk up and see the landscape in new ways. Sometimes in Anchorage, you forget that you're on one of the most extreme tides in the world. We have a port that is critical to just about every aspect of life in Alaska. And you can see the markings on the plywood showing the different tidal measurements, and just getting people to have a narrower but a broader view of place. And this is my last slide before I turn it over to Budil, but we work to think about language and to think about place. This is a water tower that all of us walk by on a familiar beach in Alaska. We talk about beaches differently than they do on the East Coast, but it's still a beach. And we put this banner asking all of us to reimagine. I think we all have a lot of humility we need to embrace to move forward, a lot of decolonization and understanding to do, to embrace as we work with communities. And as practitioners, I think rethinking and reimagining is our task for the days ahead. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Julie. And I think that ties in really well with where Jessica left off, right? Reimagining, and importantly, reimagining together, that this isn't a siloed or individual task. This is something for all of us to do as a community here, but also within our individual communities. I am now going to ask our final presenter to join us on our virtual stage, also from the Anchorage Museum, a curator who I have had the pleasure of being in another virtual event with earlier last fall. Bodil Kjellstrup, if you are here, would you like to take the virtual stage?
I sure can. I'm here. Can everyone see me? Cool.
Yep, we could see you.
That's good to hear. Hello, everyone. My name is Bodil Kjellstrup. I live in the northern part of Norway in a city called Tromsø, and here it is 6:48 in the afternoon. And we are doing the same as Julia. We are waiting for the snow. We haven't had snow here since October, which is the first time in 83 years that we haven't had snow in January. So the theme of that Julie was mentioning about actually witnessing and being a part of changes that is a part of our everyday life is very much a part of our lives here in the north of Norway as well. I like that Julie's last slide stopped with the thought of reimagine, because when I looked at the theme for this meeting, I think a lot of the power of our future is in reimagining. And I'll run through an example of a project that we did at the museum that I'm working for now here in Northern Norway. It's called Northern Norway Art Museum, which highlights how our perspectives of how we look at history enables us to look at the future in a different way. And the project is called Like Betsy, and I'll get back to that. But it's all about also taking the power of understanding that it is in my individual power to reimagine how I look upon my surroundings, my knowledge base, my meetings, and my ability to listen to stories that are shared with me. I'm going to share a PowerPoint with you. Let's see here if we could make this. There we go. Just a second. There we go. Can you guys see the PowerPoint presentation?
I don't think so.
Okay, we'll try again. I'll just go down here in just a second. We'll try here. There we go. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Good. So this is the museum that I work for now. I was lucky to work at the Anchorage Museum for a year and a half with Julie and her amazing staff, working with the Seed Lab project. Now that I returned back to Norway, I have the position as the acting director of Northern Norway Art Museum. And I would like for you guys to take a look at the guy on the standing on the left side of the photo here, which is Ruel Amundsen, a famous Norwegian polar explorer, a typical representative of the polar storytelling and the conquering of the North, the conquering of space, the conquering of nature. I'll get back to him through the project I'm talking about later. Norway is one of the countries that has been very high on the equity, gender equity standard. This is, we've been there for quite a long while, and it's a part of us being also able to do that through our lucky position of finding oil outside our, in our ocean outside of Norway, which then again established a welfare state that enabled some possibilities when it came to how the government could support equity through both more employment, but also through different ways of supporting families and parental leave, etc. We've been on the top list for quite a few years due to those muscles of being in a way able to do that. So this is from the in 2018 numbers, and the country that actually got as #1 was Iceland. We have, according to this, we have kind of closed 83% of our overall gender gap in Norway, which I find interesting because it's, as a sociologist in base of my education, I always find it interesting to see how these numbers, where do they come from? What kind of data do they represent? And I'll get back to that in the end of my short talk here. But Iceland is a good place, and we are intrigued by the changes they have made there. And one of the reasons why they have moved ahead and become on the top of this list is because they have been able to put, they have decreased the gender gap when it comes to high level positions. Here you can see one of the reasons why we do good on that screening, which is kind of a base of the working relationships and the building of the Norwegian state in a way. And that is that a lot of the females and the women are participating as a part of the workforce. Here you can see the development from 72 to 2018, men being green and women being navy blue. And you can see how the last, since year 2000, we are getting closer and closer, and how actually a little bit, it's decreasing a little bit in how much men participate in the workshop, but the increase in how women have participated and are participating now is definitely increasing. So you should think that this is a happy-go-lucky country in Europe. Well, it is not always like that. As you can see here, this is a typical way of looking at how we have equity. And when we start looking at money and power, that's when the differences are still very visible here in Norway as well. And I think this is important to have as a background for discussing and talking about how the glass ceiling is a part of our world today, and that we're using that wording and how we can see how northern countries are developing. Here you can see the average pay per month in Norway, and you can see that women are still lagging behind men. So women have an average of 5,476, and men has 6,160. But another indicator that shows this as well is when we look at what is the division between leaders. Here you can see that 63.6% of leaders are still men, and 36.3% of leaders are women. But in the sector that I work now, in museums and especially art museums, the art institutions are led by women. Here you can see from the left, Director of Cultural Fund, Kristin Danielsen, Sørlandet Art Museum through the Uglestad. The National Art Museum is led by a woman whose name is Karin Hinsbo, Henny Onsdag by Tone Hansen, and Astrup Fearnley Museum by Solveig Østbø. So this is a big debate in Norway, is how the glass ceiling within the cultural sector in many ways have been broken a few years ago. And these amazing women are doing eminent work, of course, as leader of the art institutions. But equity and a glass ceiling is still a big part of our community. And when they started looking at how much art is represented that is made by women, they did a research on that 2 years ago. And it turned out that 89% of 17 of Norway's largest public funded art museums have a total of 130 artworks. 89% of these are created by male artists. So on average, there are 29 works by each male artist and 6 works by each female artist. So there are the share of men are higher, and the number of artwork from men are higher than the number of artwork from each woman as well. So this made a big impact in the discussion in the art world as the museums started discussing how could this equality within the art develop quickly. And one of the things was a need to look at how we buy in new things. And there was a call to all the institutional leaders to start buying more artwork from female artists. And I think that that triggered a really interesting discussion in Norway that focused on a few important issues. Is that how do we look upon buying? How can we balance the number of women and men in our art collections? If we continue to buy mainly female artists in the next 5 to 10 years, what does that do, and how does that represent a totality of what's going on in the art field over several years? So there was a lot of heated debate related to that. I think it was an important discussion, because one of the things that we need to do within our line of work is to look at different perspectives on how women are portrayed in art and portrayed through museums in general. And I think that is one of the important discussions to bear in mind as an institutional leader, and to always keep that kind of notion in the back of my head as not always looking through one lens, but being able to look through different lenses at the institution, but also the institution's role in a bigger society, of course. So I would like to, on this background of gender equality in Norway, I want to go over to a project that we was called Like Betsy. It was an exhibition that was held at the museum 2 years ago, and this is from the entrance area. And the exhibition is focusing on Betsy Akerslot Berg. She was a painter, lived from 1850 to 1922. We described her as a part of the way that we wanted to talk about this was to also reach out to younger audiences and have a possibility to talk about people with power, like using powerful word as well when we're describing her, but keeping the tone light. You can see her sitting here in the mouth of a whale on one of her travels in the northern parts of Norway. So she was a badass maritime painter, an island queen, and a globetrotter who went her own way in her own time. What was very interesting about her is that her path always led to the ocean. And that is what she described as her one true longing. And I can relate to the ocean being a true longing, as I could never imagine living without the view and the closeness to the ocean. Betsy was actually a very, very big success in her time. But in Norwegian art history, she is hardly mentioned. And why was that? And here you can see Betsy in one of her own designs. She painted a lot on the seashore, and she made her own box that she could use when she was painting down by the seashore. And you can see her outfit that she's rigged for a bad weather day when needed, and she had that flag that on top of the small mast there that she would put up when she wanted help to come and get ashore again. So that's a typical way that you could find her in painting on her locations. Shows innovation, it shows ability to adapt, it shows ability to collaborate, and it shows a very strong will to make sure that you're going for what makes you happy and your goals. Some of her work also, being a maritime painter, is also very interesting because it was regarded as more of a masculine field of objects to paint. But her objects are everything from hard storms to beautiful seashores and calm waters. But she will also paint scenes that was more devastating. After one shipwreck outside the coast, there were people floating ashore, and she went down to paint them and that setting when that happened. But she was not allowed to paint that because she was a woman. So she did that painting using one of the boys from her village to be a prop and help her out on the seashore. So she met all those kind of obstacles as a painter in a time where she was actually very in a field within the art, where she met a lot of had a lot of male painters that would also paint the same objects, but she would not have the opportunity to do it in the same way as they did. So she found out her own solutions. This amazing artist that like Betsy was, she is a typical representative of how, when we look at the art history, we tend to look through already written material that has been written in a time that has mainly had male art historic writers. So when the knowledge about her was lost, that was one of the reasons that came up in research about her. But also the fact that she made international breakthrough, and she was a part of the European monarchy halls and would be portrayed in Paris, etc. Whereas male artists that came just after her would actually get royal medals in Norway for being in the Paris exhibitions. But already we had forgotten that she had been there several years. But when a male was able to get in, he got a medal. So we thought this space of this amazing artist and this strong voice and this innovating woman was also a very good way for us as a museum to focus on some of the still harsh numbers related to the gender gap within art today. So we plastered the entire exhibition hall with a lot of different hacks like this, giving the audience more information about the status in the art world when it comes to the gender gap. And they could go in through the QR code to find more information if they wanted. So this was a way for us to reflect a little bit about what is our role as a museum to look and describe how we as museum and as art historians and as institutions also have an important task of opening up the discussions and the talks and the perspectives of female artists, not only present female artists, but also looking at how we redefined an art history and how do we reconnect with artists that are not a part of a canon, maybe mainly fostered and written by male art historians, but actually also doing that, we needed much needed research to be able to lift up artists, female artists that have been forgotten. And I think that is all about taking a chance of looking at redefining what quality is and redefining the arenas where we are able to talk about this and daring to realize that in our own perspectives, we might have done wrong before, but looking at ways to repair as well a knowledge base that we want to have as our base of future work. And that brings me over to some of the work that we did at Anchorage Museum through the Seed Lab, that is about mending a thing. I think mending a thing is a project that we did through Seed Lab that was enabling us to create an arena where we could focus on a forgotten knowledge or a knowledge base that was kind of that we were losing our ability to continue working with, and also losing the relationships that those situations of repair actually created in a society. And by reimagining where dialogue happens or where important dialogue happens, and reimagining how you could create groups within them where people and women and people and men, of course, could come and talk about our future, to find safe places to reimagine together how our future could look and what is important in our future. I think that was one of the main takeouts and from those sessions, in addition to several new things that came up, the genes that was repaired and the knowledge that was shared was a gift for everyone. But in a society, creating safe places for dialogues where you can actually together reimagine a future was a very important part of that project. And I'm going to run quickly back to don't get dizzy while I do this, but I wanted to get back to this first one when we talk about reimagining, because there you can see Ruel Amundsen standing there on top of his pedestal. And we did a project where we, through like Betsy, said that we don't have any women standing like statues like that in our city, and we need to start discussing that. Why is it only male statues or men standing on those statues looking down at us in our city? So we wanted to put a focus on that, and we, as you can see, the case that Betsy used when she was painting, we put that around the statue of Ruel Amundsen, and that became a big issue in the town. We have never had as many discussions or so many newspaper articles about the museum as we did with this project. It was people said that we didn't respect Ruel Amundsen, and as you can see, we haven't covered him. When you stand in front of him, it's on the mid of just above his knees in a way, where this case came, and it was, of course, in dialogue with the city as well, so we were allowed to do that and everything. But it was interesting to see how this of putting something around a male statue to put focus on why there are so few women statues, that was a debate that didn't actually come out of that. What came out of that was how we could do this to Ruel Amundsen and thereby not acknowledging the memory of him. But there was a really hard transition and dialogue to get people to think about the bigger issue that we wanted to focus on when it was actually lifting women, and why are women not a part of our storytelling. Here we go again, quick review to get back to mend a thing. So when we talk about the glass ceiling and when we talk about breaking it and having these strong voices in in the north, and as female, I would like to say that for me it is about redefining whether there is a glass ceiling or not. Here you can see an image of Sami Lavo. Sami is the indigenous people of northern Norway. And when I saw that, I thought about that as I was thinking about the discussion today about a glass ceiling. And as you can see on the top, that there is no ceiling. There's always an opening in the Sami Lavo for the smoke to come out. And when you are inside one of those lavo, you will always see the sky through that opening. And it's nothing holding you back from seeing that sky, and it's nothing holding you back from there's no stopping if you went up that way. And I think that that is also a way for me to say that getting back to those, some of those close and personal and things that we experience in our life seems to be also what I can see in discussions here in Norway, seems to be more of a debate that is going of not reaching up and not breaking the glass ceilings, but actually taking a step back and seeing if you even want to go there, because you are redefining the powers of defining your own life, and you're taking more control of that and looking at other things as more important in life. So I think that it is important for me, always important to think that there's always a way where I can look at the stars and look at the bigger picture. And if I can even do that, laying on the back in a level and thinking about the big perspectives and having a possibility to share thoughts and keeping the freedom of thought open in today's society, I think that is both here in the North and as a museum leader and as an individual and as a woman, I think that is very, makes my heart warm to continue fighting for those elements and that respect among us as people. So thank you for listening. Come visit Nordnorsk Kunstmuseum if you're ever in the north of Norway. I'll give you a tour and show you around. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bodil. We so appreciate it. And if everyone could give a virtual round of applause for our final speaker, I am going to invite our other speakers back onto our main stage because we have a few questions in these last 20 minutes. So again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat and we'll invite you on, or I can read them for you. Our first question comes from Andrea, and this is a question for Jessica, but maybe for all of you as well. So Andrea wants to know something about regarding the image we have to keep up as women or femme-presenting individuals in the field. She fears that by succumbing to those expectations, we continue to reinforce them. But as you, Jessica, said, if we don't bend to those expectations, we are often not taken seriously. Can you speak a little bit to walking that line between compromising for the good of your image as a professional and breaking those harmful stereotypes in the context of activism? And can you take a moment to speak to your ideas for how we can begin to create spaces where we proactively establish that our academic merit has nothing to do with and is more valuable than our image?
Well, that's the key to it all, isn't it? Right? If we all knew all of this, then we'd be fine. So it's a big question, and I very much appreciate it from Andrea. You know, it's so I hope the people on the call heard my characterization of the woman when I was a young graduate student, speaking about what she thought women needed to be and how they needed to look to succeed, versus say maybe what I do in my own life. Those are two different visions. And that's all fine. I mean, that's one of my answers, right? Is being true to yourself. If you want to be ultra femme, go for it. You want to be ultra not femme? Go for it. You want to be somewhere in the middle? Go for it. Just be true to yourself, right? And so in terms of image, I think that that's just really real. Now, how to be taken seriously all the time? Well, I'm not sure I take every male I meet seriously all the time. So I might ask, why should I take every person or myself seriously all the time too? But in terms of being taken seriously, again, it's remaining true to your own personality and self, speaking on what you know. And if you are stretching in a way, stretch, to answer something that maybe you're a little bit uncertain of, be fully aware of that and acknowledge it. And that's a very academic answer in many ways. But I think remaining true to self and being as genuine as possible, whenever possible, is always a good move. And sometimes it's not going to work for you. I mean, I remember being in a job interview and being really true to myself when pressed to the wall to speak about my abilities and my capabilities, because I was being questioned by a senior male colleague about what I could bring to a job. And I was kind of a bitch right back to him, and I didn't get that job. And you know what? I'm okay with that. So sometimes remaining true to yourself doesn't get you where you want to go, but maybe over the longer term, maybe that's not where you should be, or maybe it wouldn't have been a good situation anyway. So that's a personal example for thinking about this. But I think that the more you can just remain true and do the good work that you think you're doing and you know that you're doing is really all that it comes down to. And I know that Julian and Bodil probably also have something to contribute. Didn't mean to put you on the spot.
That's okay. I think that for me, being personal is a part of being professional. I think it is what you're saying as well, Jessica, be yourself, because in the second that I also, in addition to the job I have, need to be aware of a role or an image I need to have, then I don't have the hours in the day to actually do that. So take the shortcut. I focus on the tasks and the work and the museum and the role I have, but trying to not let me as a person disappear in that. But actually, in the day, I don't have time to take on all the different images that somebody else, in a way, wants me to have, because we are operating on so many different arenas. One day, you're talking to kids, and you're supposed to be happy-go-lucky kindergarten teacher and talk about art and all that with them. And the next day, you're meeting with the Minister of Culture, and the next afternoon, you're having tea with a collector. So if you should kind of be able to have all of those, that would be your job. So it's easier for me to focus on the institution and the role I'm playing and as the task and keeping it personal at the same time. I think.
I agree. I think with US politics lately, I've thought a lot about integrity, and that has always been my guide. I have the advantage, perhaps, to be surrounded by strong, wonderful women who do powerful work, like Bodil and Victoria. I think I also have an advantage of, my job is to tell other people's stories, not my own. It's not to put myself first. So to me, my goals are secondary. The institution and perhaps is primary, but the institution's role is to tell the stories of communities and other women and female artists. And there's great grounding in the idea that you're in service of something bigger than yourself. But I would say that in all things, personal integrity as your guide leaves very few regrets in the rearview mirror. And I will say that to all of the people at Capitol Hill today. So.
Yes, those are wise words, particularly in 2021. And I think all of you brought up this multiple roles that we play. And maybe after our next participant comes on to ask her question, if we have time, I'll ask a question about that. But for right now, I'm going to ask Dr. Vera Kuklina, who is a future presenter at another webinar series that we are doing, to come on and ask your question, I think mostly to Julie and Bodil.
Hello, Julie, and thank you, Victoria, for organizing such an event. And thank you, Jessica, for inspiring speech. And my question to Julia is about intersections of gender and indigeneity, because here we are gathered to express our solidarities with women. And then I hear about indigenous artists and I don't hear their names. Every time when you even show just a picture of female white artist, you tell us who she is. And even when you talk about installations by indigenous artists and curators, you skip their names. Why it's still happening? Thank you.
I'm sorry if that's the impression I left. I hope I mentioned Marie Rexford, who's in the photograph, and Allison Warden, who's the, I think, very powerful rap artist who talks about Kaktovik and human lifeways. Fran Dubrock is the curator of the Women of the North, and at the center of that project are Indigenous artists and Indigenous women. I think there's important conversation to have about the traditional role of women in society, and I think Indigenous communities have a powerful story to tell about women and the idea of women's work and what that means. And that exhibit talks a lot about redefining women's work and its value. My intention is never to leave any woman behind, and hopefully our work represents that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I don't know, Bodil, Jessica, if you want to comment, maybe not on that specific question, but more on this intersectionality as we're working, you know, as women about gender issues, but also across many issues beyond what we've discussed today.
I can go on a quick note on that, because I think that at all times, I think people have had different kind of specters of themselves, of who they have been in their everyday life. I think that it's very important to look at the language that we're using regarding that, of what we are describing or labeling things with, whether that is or that can never be accurate for every person that are meeting those descriptions in any way. We all have, in a way, a personal understanding and a personal reflection, a personal platform in the language used about us in any way regarding all of what we are. I think that language also is an interesting thing when it comes to how we can see people of the North being described. Ruel Amundsen, that I described, that this heroic conquering type that is so typical for understanding or description of the North. 5 years started looking at his diaries of how many tasks he did in his everyday life that was actually related to what you would look upon as feminine tasks in a household through a 1950 lens, like cooking, caring, cleaning, and all those things. So I think that being in the intersectional self is one thing of how we can read it as individuals, and we'll always meet the view of another, and in that we have two different languages, because normally, because every individual's understanding of these terms are normally based on a closer understanding of a self than it is of another. It's about a lot of negotiating the understanding, and a lot of dialogue, which I think is the core element of the future, is having arenas, having trust to take those dialogues.
I'd only add one small moment there for thinking about this, in the sense that, Bodil, when you were speaking earlier, not this time, you mentioned how women in Norway are maybe thinking differently about their futures or what the glass ceiling is. And I think that's really important. But what I think it also opens up is questions of, well, what are the experiences of women in different countries and Indigenous women, in the case that Vera Kuklina has brought up for us. And not only, of course, Indigenous women, but if we use this example together for thinking about it. And I think that there are some really big differences across space for what women think of as those glass ceilings, or what they might want, what our salaries are, or how they compare to other people's salaries. I think that those are big conversations. So I guess all I would say is that we're not just one group of one kind of woman here, right? And I think that's another thing that could be really, really valuable to explore in the Arctic as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And not to plug this series, but over the next few months, we will be showcasing over 20 women across the Arctic, including 2 Indigenous scientists in our upcoming webinar in February. But with the few minutes we have left, I thought I'd ask a final question. And it's something that at least is hanging heavy on my mind, but also what some of you brought up in your presentations about having to take on many roles, right? And many of those roles are during the COVID-19 pandemic being disproportionately burdened onto women, right? Caring for our community, caring for our institutions, ensuring that inclusion and equity are front and center in a way that I think we all are hopefully very engaged in at this moment. And as we finish our session today, I wonder if each of you can talk about how you have negotiated and managed this, right? Supporting other women, supporting this future that is more equitable and inclusive, acknowledging that it's kind of exhausting, that this is a lot, that we are putting often 110% of ourselves into this. And I think maybe your words and experiences and maybe advice would be helpful to others on this call who might be experiencing both that exhausting moment, but maybe an exhilarating moment to give more and to do more to support others. It's a big question.
I will just say that 2020 and already 2021 have been an enormous education on the pressures on leaders and on women and on community. I think we've all learned deep lessons about ourselves, what service means, what value our institutions have to communities. Those are important lessons, maybe many of them learned late, but I think we have a new focus on the work to do ahead. I think our personal selves are ever more key to our ways forward, are the personal risks we take and the personal stories we tell. We need to show our vulnerability in new ways, our humility in new ways. I have been at home with children learning. I have been leading an institution forward in great uncertainty. And along the way, learning so many things about what it needs to mean to lead. So humbling.
Julie, I could not have said that better. I think that sums up a lot in day-to-day life. And so I have a son, he's 12, and he's been home off and on with, school being canceled and being remote, and figuring out how to do that while leading a program and teaching and keeping it really tight and real in my own home is hard. But it's one of the ways I try to think about it, is teaching the next generation to be flexible, whether they're male or female. and to make their own lunches, right? And those kinds of very small things, but really important for empowering a future, all sorts of future generations. And that's just one very tiny step amidst so many others that could be taken, and just reaching out to people and making sure they're okay, and just sending a word here and there to people I can't see right now, for all either colleagues or professional or personal friends and family. So many different good things to do. Julie said it best.
Thank you. I agree with both Julie and Jessica. And but I think that one of them, for me, one of the main issues is that this really challenging time has also redefined what is value. It has defined many like that again. I come back to that. That is not for me to give, in a way, advice on what the value is, or determine that for others, but looking for value, looking for those new ways that give input, because running an organization in distressed times also means that you need to look for other ways of getting positive input to your life to be able to stand in that role. So look for those small things that might not be the big wins, but it's not maybe that a big win is what we're looking for in these times. It might be the gathering of all those small valuable moments that will actually be what we can get our kind of energy from in these times. And then we know that there will be changes, and we know that past history has lived through harsh times as well. And I think that we, as museum leaders, we can learn from that, looking at what has happened before, because it helps us look at the future with the knowledge base of and an understanding and a security in a way of that. And I think that art has in these times have been very important for me, because knowing that there are so many different ways of expressing what is happening to us now, that we need to find that outlet for expressing ourselves in our daily life, even when we're not artists, to find that place to kind of and get it out, and at the same time know that these harsh times have happened before, but find your value, find the value in your everyday life.
And I think that is a pretty wonderful place for us to end our first session, to find value. And I think that this space here that will continue throughout 2021 is an invitation to find that value, to learn together, and to continue the discussion. So please join me. I know there have been lots of thank yous in the chat, but giving another virtual round of applause to our incredible speakers. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Bodil, for sharing your time, your expertise, and your experiences on such a personal level with us. And I invite all of you to join us at our next Breaking the Ice Ceiling webinar on February 3rd, where we will be discussing co-producing knowledge about Arctic conservation with Indigenous communities and the wolf pack hunting approach in northern Russia. We will be featuring two incredible Indigenous scientists in that webinar, and we will be emailing out a way for you to register for free in the follow-up email to this. So thank you all again.